For 3 counties and 100 miles of open range, nobody wanted the land beyond the salt flats. And for good reason. The basin sat west of Dry Mercy like a scar the earth had given up trying to heal. White-crusted, shimmering, hot enough to blister boot leather by noon. Cattle wouldn't cross it. Horses balked at the edge. Even the coyotes gave it a wide pass, trotting along the ridge instead of cutting through. Before we go any further, I want to connect with everyone watching right now. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are watching from today. When the county opened bids on the land that spring of 1882, every rancher, speculator, and hopeful homesteader in the territory came to the courthouse steps with the same list in their pockets. River parcels, shaded groves, grazing fields close to town. The kind of land you could look at and see a future without squinting. Caleb Prescott bought none of it. He stood in the back of the auction hall in a dust-colored coat, his dark hair cropped short under a sun-bleached hat, and he waited. He let every good parcel go without raising his hand. The auctioneer called lot after lot, rich bottomland, creek-fed meadows, timber stands thick with Douglas fir, and Caleb watched them sell to men who shook hands and grinned like they had just won a war. Then came Lot 27, the salt basin and the bluffs beyond it. 240 acres of what the county surveyor had described as land of negligible agricultural value. Caleb raised his hand. The room went quiet. He paid 11 cents an acre. Nobody bid against him. To understand what Caleb saw in that dead ground, you have to understand what he had already survived. He was born Caleb Engel in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania in 1854. His father, Heinrich, had come over from Bavaria with a trunk of seeds, a leather notebook full of planting charts, and a belief that soil was a living thing. Not dirt to be used up, but a creature to be understood. Heinrich kept a kitchen garden that people came from 3 townships over to see. Things grew in it that had no business growing in Pennsylvania clay. Figs, apricots, a stubborn little almond tree that fruited every other year despite the cold. Your grandfather planted almonds on a hillside in Bavaria where everybody said the frost would kill them, Heinrich told young Caleb once, kneeling beside him in the garden. He watched that hill for a year before he put a single seed in. He watched where the snow melted first, where the bees went in March, where the water pooled and where it ran. By the time he planted, he knew that hill better than it knew itself. Caleb remembered that. He married Sarah Daniels at 21. She was a good woman, steady and kind. They moved west together in 1876, following the railroad as far as it went, then riding horses the rest of the way into Montana Territory. They settled outside Dry Mercy, built a cabin from cottonwood logs, and started with 40 head of cattle. For 2 years it was hard but honest. Caleb worked the cattle. Sarah kept the cabin and tended a small garden. Caleb had a good eye for land. He noticed things other people missed. The way water moved underground, the places where green persisted long after the surface dried, the sheltered pockets where frost came late and left early. It was on a supply ride in the autumn of 1878 that he first saw the salt flats. The usual route was flooded, so Caleb swung wide and rode along the western rim instead. The basin spread below him like a white lake, crusted, cracked, lifeless. Heat rose from it in visible waves even in October. But at the far edge, where the white crust broke against a line of dark bluffs, Caleb saw something that made him pull up and sit still in the saddle for a long time. Green, small, stubborn patches of it, wild fruit shrubs, chokecherry, serviceberry, something that looked like feral plum growing in a ragged line where the bluffs met the basin floor, growing where they should not have survived, not just surviving but fruiting. He noted it in his mind the way his father would have noted it. He filed it away and rode home. 3 months later, Sarah died. The fever swept through the settlements that winter. Sarah had been nursing sick neighbors for weeks. By the time she admitted she wasn't feeling well, the sickness had already taken hold. She lived 4 days, long enough for Caleb to sit beside her and hold her hand while the fever ate her from the inside. He buried her on the ridge above the cabin under a cairn of flat stones. He was 24 years old, alone, and the owner of 40 head of cattle he couldn't manage by himself. He sold 30 of the cattle that spring, kept 10. A shaggy gray dog appeared at his door during the worst of that winter, half-starved, ribs showing through matted fur, with amber eyes that watched him with a patience that seemed older than any dog had a right to. Caleb fed him. The dog stayed. He called him Dust. For the next 3 years, Caleb ran the small herd and rode the supply routes. People in Dry Mercy knew him as the Prescott widower and left him mostly alone, which suited him fine. But he kept thinking about those shrubs at the edge of the salt flats. He rode out to them twice more, once in spring, once in late summer. Both times they were there, green and stubborn against the white. The second time he dismounted and walked the ground. He knelt and dug into the soil with his hands. The salt crust was thick near the basin floor, but as he moved toward the bluffs it thinned. And right at the base of the dark rock, he found something that made him sit back on his heels and breathe. Clean soil, dark, cool, and damp. A narrow shelf, maybe 40 feet wide and a quarter-mile long, running along the base of the bluffs like a hidden seam. The rock above blocked the afternoon sun, and moisture was coming up from below. Underground seepage filtering through the sandstone and emerging at the base in a slow, steady weep that kept that narrow shelf alive while everything around it baked and crusted. He sat there for an hour with Dust beside him. He thought about his grandfather's almond tree. He thought about watching where the snow melted first. Then he went home and started saving every dollar he could. The day after the auction, word spread through Dry Mercy like smoke. He bought the salt flats. The Prescott widowers lost his mind. Frank Harlan, who ran the general store, told anyone who'd listen. That ground won't grow a fence post. He may as well have buried his money. Garrett Sutter, who'd bought a Prime Creek parcel, shook his head. Grief does things. His wife would have known better. Jonas Bell, the farrier, was less kind. He's a man alone buying land nobody wanted. That tells you everything. Caleb heard all of it. Dry Mercy was small enough that everything said at the general store reached every ear within a day. He didn't argue, he didn't explain. He hitched his wagon and rode out to the salt flats with Dust beside him and a load of supplies in the back. A pickaxe, a shovel, burlap sacks, rope, and 40 sapling trees, peach, apple, and pear, that he had ordered from a nursery in Sacramento 3 months before the auction. The saplings had cost more than the land. He started planting the next morning before dawn. The work was brutal. The salt crust had to be broken and scraped away from each planting site. The clean soil underneath was good, dark and loamy, but thin. He had to dig carefully to avoid cutting into the salt layer below. Each tree got a hole 2 feet deep and 2 feet wide, lined with straw to insulate the roots. Watered by hand from a barrel he filled at the seepage line and hauled on a sledge. 40 trees, 40 holes. Each one took most of a morning. Dust lay in the shade of the bluffs and watched with amber eyes, patient as stone. By the end of the second week, all 40 saplings were in the ground. They looked ridiculous. Thin, pale sticks rising from the white-crusted earth. From a distance, they looked like grave markers in a cemetery nobody visited. Garrett Sutter rode out to see for himself. He sat on his horse at the edge of the basin and shook his head slowly. Caleb, fruit trees need water. Real water, not salt seep. It's not salt, Caleb said, not looking up from the hole he was digging. The seepage comes through the sandstone. It filters clean. Even so, the heat alone will kill them. The bluffs block the afternoon sun, and the basin holds warmth at night. Late frosts won't reach here the way they reach the valley. Garrett stared at him. I've thought about this for 4 years, Caleb said. Garrett rode away, shaking his head. That evening at the general store, he told Frank Harlan He's not crazy, but he's wrong. Give it 2 seasons. The first summer was the hardest. Caleb hauled water every day, barrel after barrel, sledge after sledge. The salt basin threw heat like a furnace. By noon, the air rippled and the distant mountains looked like they were melting. His hands blistered, healed, and blistered again. His skin darkened to saddle leather. He lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. 7 of the 40 saplings died. He pulled them, studied the roots, and learned. 3 had been planted too close to the salt line. 4 had gotten too little water during a week when the seepage slowed. He adjusted. He dug a shallow channel to direct the seepage more evenly. He laid flat stones along it to slow evaporation. The remaining 33 trees held. That autumn, Jonah's Bell rode out with 2 other men. They stood at the rim and looked down at the saplings, still alive. "Surviving ain't the same as growing," Jonah said loudly. "A fence post survives too, doesn't mean it'll bear fruit." Caleb said nothing. He was spreading straw around the base of a peach sapling. Dust sat beside him, watching the men. They rode away laughing. Caleb watched them go, then looked at Dust. The dog yawned and put his head on his paws. "That's about how I feel about it too," Caleb said. He kept working. Every morning before sunrise, every evening until the light failed. His hands grew thick with calluses. His shoulders ached. Some nights he was too tired to eat. But the trees held. Week after week they held. Winter came hard that year. The temperature dropped to 15 below some nights. But Caleb had been right. The bluffs held warmth. The dark sandstone absorbed heat during the day and released it through the night. The straw mulch held the ground temperature 10 degrees warmer than the valley floor. He checked the trees every morning, walking the rows with Dust at his heels. He found 2 frost cracks. He wrapped them with burlap soaked in tallow. Every tree that had survived the summer survived the winter, all 33. The second year the trees grew, thicker trunks, new branches, leaves that came in April and stayed green through August. Caleb expanded the irrigation channel and dug a small holding pond at the base of the bluffs. He lined it with clay hauled from a creek bed 4 miles away. He planted 12 more saplings to replace the 7 he'd lost. He chose the spots more carefully, testing the soil, tasting it for salt. People stopped talking about it much. Dry Mercy had other worries: a dry summer, low cattle prices, a diphtheria scare. But Caleb noticed something that second spring that made him sit down on a stone and stare. Blossoms, small, white, and fragile but unmistakable. 6 of the peach trees were blooming. They were barely 3 years old, young for fruiting, but the conditions had pushed them. The warm nights, the steady moisture, the reflected heat. It was like a greenhouse built by geology. Caleb didn't tell anyone. He thinned the blossoms, then waited. By July he had peaches, not many, 14 fruits from 6 trees, small, hard, and intensely sweet, the concentrated flavor of sugar built under stress. He ate one standing in the shade of the bluffs with juice running down his chin. He closed his eyes and tasted his father's garden in Pennsylvania. He didn't sell them. He needed another year to be sure. The third year proved it. All 33 original trees bore fruit. The 12 replacements were thriving. Caleb harvested 400 pounds of peaches, 300 pounds of apples, and 160 pounds of pears from land the surveyor had called worthless. He loaded a wagon and drove into Dry Mercy on a Saturday morning. He parked in front of the general store, pulled back the canvas cover, and sat on the seat with Dust beside him while people gathered. Nobody spoke at first. They just stared at the crates of fruit: golden peaches, red-streaked apples, pale green pears, piled high in a wagon that had come from the direction of the salt flats. Frank Harlan came out and stood on the porch with his arms crossed. "That's not from the basin," he said. "It is," Caleb said. "Can't be." Caleb held out a peach. "Taste it." Frank took it. He bit into it. The juice ran into his beard. He stood there chewing with a look on his face like a man who has just been told the world is round and has no argument against it. How, he said. The bluffs, the seepage, the reflected heat, it's all there if you look. That afternoon, Caleb sold every crate. People bought fruit the way they'd buy a miracle, half believing, half suspicious, entirely hungry. The fourth year, Caleb expanded. He planted 30 more trees along the shelf. He hired a boy from town, Will Ransom, 14 years old and strong for his age, to help with the hauling. Will was a quick learner with quiet hands. Dust took to him immediately. That was the year the merchants came. A buyer from Helena offered a contract for 500 pounds of peaches monthly. A storekeeper from Billings sent a letter asking about apples. A bakery in Butte inquired about pears. Caleb filled every order. The trees, stressed by the salt air and heat but sustained by the clean seepage, produced fruit that was smaller but denser, sweeter and longer lasting. A Prescott peach could sit in a crate for 2 weeks without softening. The apples kept through winter. People started calling the place the Salt Orchard. The fifth year changed everything. A wet spring soaked the valley floor. The bottomland orchard sat in standing water for weeks, and with the water came blight, a fungal rot that spread through the wet soil and turned healthy trees brown from the inside out. By June, every orchard in the lower valley was infected. Garrett Sutter lost 40 apple trees. The Henshaw family lost 200 trees in 6 weeks. Caleb's orchard, sitting in the dry air beyond the salt flats, was untouched. The basin's heat and aridity turned out to be a fortress against the rot. Not a single tree showed symptoms. Suddenly, the salt orchard was the only source of fresh fruit in 3 counties. Garrett Sutter rode out on a hot afternoon in July. He dismounted and walked the rows slowly, touching the trunks, studying everything. He stopped in front of Caleb. He took off his hat. "I told people you were wrong," he said. "I said give it 2 seasons. I was the one who was wrong. I'm sorry, Caleb." Caleb nodded. "The land did the work. I just paid attention." "Can you teach me what you know about soil and water? I've got 40 acres sitting empty where my orchard was. I'd like to start smarter." "Come back Thursday," Caleb said. "Bring a shovel." Garrett did, and he brought Jonas Bell with him and Frank Harlan's nephew and 2 women from the settlement east of town. Caleb walked them through the orchard row by row. He showed them the seepage line, the irrigation channels, the straw mulch. He explained the microclimate. "My father taught me that soil is alive," he told them, kneeling in the dark earth. "You have to watch it before you use it. Watch it for a year. Watch where the water goes, where the heat holds, where things grow that shouldn't. That's the land telling you what it wants to be." Jonas Bell stood in the shade of a peach tree heavy with fruit. "I called you a fool more than once," he said. "I know," Caleb said. "I was the fool." "You were wrong," Caleb said. "That's different. Fools don't come back to learn." Caleb did not sell the salt orchard. Offers came from men with money from Helena and Butte, even an investor from San Francisco. He turned them all down. Instead, he expanded carefully, row by row, season by season. He built a press house where he made cider and preserves. He hired more hands. Will Ransom became his foreman. "You can't rush soil," he told Will one evening as they walked the rows. Shadow, Dust's granddaughter, trotted at their heels. "It tells you what it needs, but it tells you slow. You have to be willing to listen at its pace, not yours." By the 7th year, the salt orchard covered 80 acres, 240 trees. It shipped cider and preserves as far as Denver. Families drove out from Dry Mercy on Sundays just to walk the rows and see it. 22 years later, Caleb Prescott was 50 years old. His hair had gone gray early, but his hands were still strong and his eyes still sharp. He walked slower than he used to. His knees ached in cold weather, but he still walked the rows every morning. Shadow had died 3 years earlier. Her daughter, a gray dog with one brown ear, walked with Caleb now. He called her Ember. The salt orchard had expanded to 140 acres, 400 trees. It employed 12 people. 3 other orchards had been established along the bluffs by people Caleb had taught. Well, Ransom ran one of them. He'd married a schoolteacher from Billings and had 2 daughters who could taste salt in soil before they could read. Garrett Sutter told anyone who'd listen that everything he knew about fruit trees he'd learned from a man the whole town had called crazy. On a warm September evening, Caleb walked the oldest row of the orchard. The first 33 survivors still stood, thick-trunked and heavy with fruit. Ember padded beside him. The air smelled like peaches and warm stone. The bluffs glowed amber in the last light. He stopped at the end of the row and rested his hand on the trunk of the oldest peach tree. It was gnarled and scarred, but still bearing. 100 peaches hung in its branches, gold against the darkening sky. He stood there feeling the bark under his palm. His father's voice came to him from long ago. Knowledge isn't like gold. Gold gets smaller when you share it. Knowledge gets bigger. Caleb had shared everything he knew, and it had grown into something he never could have built alone. A green line of orchards along the bluffs, a tradition of watching and learning, a way of looking at land that saw possibility where others saw waste. He turned and walked back through the trees toward the press house, where lamplight glowed in the windows. Ember trotted ahead, then circled back. The salt flats caught the last of the sunset and turned rose gold. For a moment the whole basin looked like something alive, not barren, not ruined, just waiting for someone patient enough to understand it. Caleb had been patient enough, and the dead ground had answered.